back to Council 2026. We will open with our karakia. Yeah. Thank you. We're going to start off with our first agenda item, the submissions on local government. I'm handing over to Nick Etheridge.
Kia ora and thank you, Mayor Baker. Just want to spend a couple of minutes on introing the range of submissions that we have coming at you for the start of 2026. Nice to be here for the start of the year. The submissions we're talking about today are obviously front of mind for you all, and I really just wanted to focus on the pathway ahead because we've shown you the other two slides, which I assume are coming up on the screen. So these are the submissions we're talking about: simplifying local government, resource management reform and the development levies. The various staff holding the pen on these submissions will be coming through to you. If we just skip to the pathway ahead slide, this I guess sets the scene for what we're up for 2026. So here we are, early 2026, where we've got the Local Government System Improvements Amendment Bill, and at the same time the granny flats legislation is being implemented, and we've sent you some information about how we've started to operationalise that, and we will keep you informed as we go on it. We've also got the start of workshops for the LTP starting shortly, and we will be bringing you an overall work program draft for you to give us feedback on so you can see how that detail plays out for the year. Then obviously we've got the annual plan 26-27 being adopted in mid-2026. We've got the transfer of water on the 1st of July. And in addition, the legislation that will be being embedded will be occurring around that time as well. So that's the Simplifying Local Government Bill, the Resource Management Reform and all the varying regulatory changes that will bring. And at the same time, the Ministry of Cities, Environment, Regions and Transport will become fully operational, which will mean a big change and upheaval with our central government agencies, which, who knows what that will mean on the ground for us as we go through. Obviously, these elements then need to be operationalised. That will come from the RM reform. Now, because of this, we've decided that it's a good idea to regularly update you on reforms throughout the year. So we will be putting in placeholders around these key times on a regular basis so that reforms will become part of our kōrero this year in particular, and probably moving into next year. Then obviously we have the LTP coming through as well during all of that. So we will do our absolute best to keep you well informed with all the information you need to make decisions to help guide where the organisation travels through this change. So, with that, I will hand over to Brian to start on the Simplifying Local Government submission.
Welcome, Brian. Are you happy with questions at the end, or do you want them going through? Or just need your speaker on.
Whatever works for councillors is fine. Do I have a... Me? Kia ora koutou. Lovely to be back. See you in 2026. I hope you had a lovely summer break. It's going to be a busy time, as Nick has outlined, and one of those busy things is going to be thinking about the future of the local government system in the region. Just a quick reminder that we talked you through that Simplifying Local Government document before Christmas, and I want to just talk a bit about the key ideas in your submission, your draft submission, and then I just want to mention as well the establishment of a regional project to look at governance options for the region. So just a short number of slides, but just a reminder on that timeline, building on what Nick has said, the intention of the government is to introduce legislation for the system reform in the middle of the year, At the same time, that's when we'll get visibility of the review that they are doing into the functions of regional government, regional councils. There's an internal piece of work government's doing. They're not inviting anybody to be part of that, where they're thinking about what the future functions of regional councils should be, what should be retained, what could be taken up to central government level, and what could be stopped. So that's an important piece of work that we'll have no visibility of until the legislation is released. And I spoke to the Regional Council earlier this week, and the whole sector, the whole Regional Council sector, is very agitated about this and the fact that it's being done without any visibilities of significant concern, but at the moment that's the way it's playing. So that legislation gets introduced mid-year, and then it is, in theory, enacted middle of the following year. And the timeline for that process is that we then need to undertake a regional reorganisation plan over the course of the following 2 years, and the new arrangements, whatever they might be, would come into place for 2031, the election in 2031. Just a bit more detail on what is in the Simplifying Local Government proposal. You'll recall before Christmas we talked about how it does two things really. One is it decapitates regional councils, removes the regional councillors and replaces them with a board of the mayors of the region. That can be with or without Crown commissioners, and so the government is seeking feedback on that question. And there's a range of arrangements sitting there about how voting would function for these combined territorial boards, whether there should be special arrangements relating to resource management that give smaller rural councils a bit more power, a bit more voice than urban councils, and also whether there are a bunch of factors that should be balanced in thinking about how much voting power each individual mayor would have around the table. And you would have seen in the draft submission that we speak to a little bit of that in it. The second piece in the proposal is around the development of regional reorganisation plans, and these are essentially the mechanism by which we consider the future governance arrangements and service delivery arrangements for the region. And again, the draft submission speaks to this and suggests that you might want to be in favour of the idea of a regional reorganisation plan. It's probably a sound process to have that conversation, but there is some feedback on the criteria that are in the draft proposal. They probably don't go far enough in terms of some of the things that you indicated before Christmas were of concern to you. The position the draft has on relationships and partnerships with mana whenua and Māori, and you also raised concerns about whether the criteria spoke strongly enough to the environment and other kind of outcomes that you might want to see achieved through those plans. Just a reminder that the primary driver of this work is efficiency in the government's mind, and there is no indication of new funding or support from government for this process, which will cost money, and the cost of transition and the cost of preparing those plans. The expectation is those costs are met by the councils that are part of that process. So just in terms of the sort of key ideas in your draft submission that's in your pack, the first one is that feedback that you had that, that this is part of a wider set of reforms that don't feel very well integrated, and that there's a real lack of an overall vision, and that this is together is impacting on local government's ability to function cohesively and also on democratic accountability. The second, I guess, key message was that, Porirua is in favour of a look at the system and looking at governance options and recognising that efficient, effective and affordable local government's really critical, and that those are important issues to have front of mind. The feedback on the draft proposal itself being a bit, you had some quite strong language that you wanted to see in the submission, and hopefully we've captured that to your satisfaction. But if there's additional feedback you have today, that would be very helpful. And then just some very specific feedback on some of the key elements of the proposed reforms, the desire to leverage the reforms and to not move to having a CTB put in place, but moving directly to a reorganisation plan, not wanting to see the Crown on those CTBs if they are established, not wanting dual voting because that gives undue weight to rural councils, which for Porirua might be of concern around the decision-making for the harbour and its catchments. Strengthening those criteria around that are used to assess reorganisation plans, the mana whenua Māori partnership criteria, the environment, community wellbeing, and then finally reflecting back to government real concerns about cost, cost of reform, cost of transition, and also making sure that they adequately resource the Local Government Commission given its indicated role in that. I might stop there and we talk about the submission before we move on to the second part.
Josh.
Thank you. Yeah. Headline for me is I think this is very good. I think this really accurately reflects the conversation we had last year, and I actually wanted to congratulate you on, I think, successfully walking that line between the strong message we want to send and potentially slightly more diplomatic or professional language, certainly than I used, which is entirely appropriate. So this is very, very good. Substantively, I don't have any things that I would want to change. In particular, the points that we have around the summary early on around simplifying the local government draft proposal, where we state our strong disagreement, poorly conceived, lack of understanding of the role and functions of local government. That's all excellent. And the key thing I jumped to look for as well was that we were really clearly pushing back on that dual voting, and I'm really glad to see that we've included that as well. The only very small potential addition that I thought we might want to include was in relation specifically to our comments around Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Māori representation. Nothing in there that I would take out. I wonder if it's worth us referencing the Māori ward referendum result, both in Porirua and across the region. I believe every council in the region that had a referendum voted to retain Māori wards. I don't think anyone in the Wellington region did.
Yep, correct.
And I think just reiterating that and showing there's a clear mandate for it. But beyond that, the substantive points in there are really, really good. And I'm very happy with this.
Thank you. Moira?
Just to echo that, I think there's a huge amount of work that's gone into all of these submissions, so I just want to acknowledge that, given incredibly short timeframes. I think the bit I'm looking for, and it may be that I can't find it in the reading, when we go to, sorry, I've scribbled all over my notes. When we talk about the regional reorganisation plan, has one of the criteria is local say, and then I'm looking in our submission, and I guess, I mean, when we come to it in our principles for our joint working group, for that issue of identifying decisions best made locally and the whole notion of subsidiarity and that kind of, because I guess we're in a slightly tricky position in terms of our submission, because we're saying we think the whole thing is all conceived and blah, 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 but we want to do it and we want to do it faster than you're suggesting. So if a cynical politician could read that as, well, what is it exactly you're saying? So it's a fine line for us. And I think in our submission, I guess for me at the beginning, what we're trying to say are kind of three principles: that we embrace the opportunity, but we object to it being a requirement, I'd have thought was what we were saying. That we're concerned about the loss of regional function, and I don't see that so strongly in our submission. We see, there's quite a bit around we shouldn't remove the councillors, but that very point you started making around we are concerned that we don't yet know what functions will be stripped from regional council. I don't see that, because, of course, stripping those functions makes it really hard to have that regional coordinated approach. And then, again, just the push. It may well be in our submission, so forgive me if it is, but the push for being really clear about what decisions are best made locally, I would like to see in there somewhere, and maybe it is already.
Shall I respond?
You can.
I think we can strengthen language in the submission on those points. Probably the one that we are weakest on is the local voice point. But the other two I think I mentioned, but we can strengthen that language.
Ross?
I'm just concerned that we don't go into too much detail. Yes, local voice, what decisions should be made locally. I mean, you'll craft it. I think it's inherently in there if we go forward with work on this that we'll address those issues. So I don't really have a problem with that. But I mean, good points made. Good points made. The only point I make, I thought there was one paragraph, and I haven't got my thing up, where we obviously criticised government, and I just don't. We can push back against government. I saw it if I was a government minister reading it. Not that any government minister may read it, but their flunkies will. Sorry, public servants.
We are
will.
live.
Public servants will, and I just I'll pick it up later and talk to you about it. That was all. I thought it was an excellent submission.
Thank you. Looking around, Taku.
Yeah, just to concur with Councillor Trillins around optics, around the Māori participation. Certainly concur with that.
Thank you. Jeff?
Kia ora koutou ngā mihi kia koutou katoa mo te tauhou, me he kai mahi mo tēnei take. I want to just, notwithstanding the fact that I concur with many of the other comments that have been made already, I think one of the balancing acts that I've been reading this document is obviously the reorganisation plan, which we'll get into greater detail to have a conversation feedback in a moment, is that we haven't made an agreement as a council, or and the only one I think so far has made a statement about this is Wellington City. We've got to be very careful about what we put in this letter, without limiting us or misrepresenting us when it comes to what we're going to do with the reorganisation plan. It may, however, be important to note that in our submission, that other councils are leading a potential alternative approach, and that there are principles that are already in place in there, and that those may be what is also the same, which is covered by all the other councils as well. It gives further flesh to the point, I think, which is about trying to provide more, without trying to provide more verbiage, more flesh to that point that we are trying to act in good faith, which would counteract the possibility of so-called flunkies thinking that we're just being really grumpy about the whole situation. Kia ora.
Kathleen?
Yeah, I think a lot's been covered by my colleagues, lots of good points that I agree with. I think it's a good submission. There's a lot covered. I do have 2 points to make, or one's really a question and the other one is a comment. I'm not comfortable with the submission signalling a 2028 timeframe at this stage. Because I feel like a 2028 date signals confidence that amalgamation is likely to be the outcome before the evidence is available. So if the modelling, I would prefer, I guess, the submission to avoid signalling that timeframe and instead reflect more an openness to reform, with sequencing, subject to robust financial modelling, comparative risk analysis, and regional consensus. So my suggested wording, if needed, would be that Porirua City is open to exploring reorganisation options, including potential alternative sequencing subject to robust finance modelling, comparative risk analysis, and regional agreement. I do have one question, which is, if the modelling ultimately shows that amalgamation, for whatever reason, is not a net benefit for our residents, whether it's financially, operational, democratically, what are the mechanisms for stepping back under this accelerated pathway? So what would be the formal off-ramp?
When you say stepping back, you mean not going towards the amalgamation discussion? Is that
No. I'm saying if we find out that with all the evidence and the business studies that come to us from that group that's coming up, if it's found out that, you know, it's maybe not the best thing for our region, and there's this accelerated approach that's to 2028 that's been suggested here. What's the off ramp?
When do you all answer that?
I just want to point out it's really a process issue that next week you'll be asked to sign off the submission formally with any changes that you've suggested, feedback incorporated. At the same time, you'll be asked to sign off a paper committing to reform in that time frame. So by the time we can manage the agenda, it is next week, isn't it? So both of those papers will be there in front of you simultaneously. The paper we are presenting to you on that amalgamation proposal will, we don't call it amalgamation, it's not assuming amalgamation, but it is assuming reorganisation of some sort. It's very handy terminology, but it's probably leads us to some misunderstanding in the community anyway. So it's a very similar report to the one presented to Wellington City recently. All the other councils in the metropolitan area are doing a similar paper in this kind of time frame. So you will be asked to look at the time frame and a pretty high-level process to establish an understanding regionally, both for this council and other councils, about that. So it's not a concrete commitment to that. It's actually, there'll be multiple off-ramps, I'm sure, because if the evidence isn't there, the evidence isn't there for it. So, but it's committing to a pathway that could arrive in that time frame. So we can make the submission vaguer, but I just wanted to pre-warn you that you will be asked at the same meeting to commit to a time frame that could deliver change in that time frame.
Does that answer you? Have you got another question? Or
I guess I'm trying to understand the tangible benefit of accelerating beyond the government stage timeline. What do we gain by shortening that process, and how does that outweigh the potential transition costs and ratepayer exposure?
I think that's really a question for the Mayor. It was covered at the Mayoral Forum quite extensively. There was really general agreement amongst the mayors across the whole region, actually, not just the urban area, that demolishing regional government ahead of any tangible proposal for a future that didn't involve there was quite a lot of opposition to that idea of the CTB, the Combined Territorial Board. It was to try and get ahead of the government's proposal for that, which did not accord with any of the mayors in that room, in fact.
no, all the mayors agreed. It's about the regional council and all of us being one at a set time. The government's pushing them early, so we have all put our hands up and said we need to look at reform early and working together. We want regional council within us, so it would mean that we were all one. We don't want to wait till the next timeline, because actually then you've got two organisations and it's not working. If you're going to do reform, you do it once and do it correctly. So the timeline might seem sharp, but we have to work towards that. And we've also been given a mandate by our residents with our referendum to look at it, only look. So that's where that came from. So all the mayors in the region are working to that, as are iwi. Moira.
We'll talk about this next week too, I guess, but my understanding before Christmas, when we looked at the legislative timeline, in a way, we need the willingness of government to squeeze us in a slightly irregular way into their very fast timeline. So we're how certain are we that that government is even amenable to us doing something a little bit differently?
So that is through the mayoral forum. So I can't give you an update on that because I haven't met with Andrew. So he is our chair of our mayoral forum. So we are working through that with government. They are keen. All sides of government are keen. We have had a discussion. So it's a matter of how does it happen?
And if I could, I'm sorry, just going back to the submission, I noticed something I'd forgotten to mention. It's a really tiny thing, but on the last page, we talk about, with our partners, we're intending to establish and resource a regional project to undertake the work, blah, 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 blah. I just noted that could be read as us saying we think we can manage the cost of this. So maybe it's because I'm, thinking about picky ministers. We may just want to be clear that we're putting up money to try and resource our investigation of this, but we don't think the full transition is possible without resourcing.
We're discussing resourcing over every issue at the moment with them, obviously, with what's happening in the region. Josh.
Thank you. Yeah. So just further to this, this 2028 timeline, and we'll have the substantive discussion next week, but I think it's relevant to this. My sense is that there is not consensus, but overall agreement to a degree around this table about the rough direction of travel that we should be moving in. I also get the sense that potentially the area that councillors may differ the most is on that timeline, and that's where there's some discussion that still needs to be had. So I guess just echoing the point that potentially indicating a strong 2028 in the submission before. It's almost contingent on how we vote on things next week, I guess. What I'd like to signal is that what I would like to see in the paper next week is some options around timeline.
Well, that depends on the government. So that's why we've put that in. They've already got 31, so we're both working so both dates are in there.
Yeah. So I guess just in terms of when we are signing off on our paper next week and we're indicating as a council what our preference around timeline is, I think it would be prudent for us to have a really robust discussion about that. My instinct is I lean in the direction of saying, well, maybe we should bring something to a referendum in 28 for a 2031 online. I'm open to having that discussion around what we land at, but so I guess signalling I'd like to see some options in the paper around that, and that potentially, because we haven't come to a consensus as a council around that yet, that maybe we shouldn't be including a date in the paper at the moment.
We can't, yeah. Okay, Brian, I'm not going to answer that actually.
Sure. I guess I just wanted to highlight what I think possibly the two options are.
Yeah.
So option one is that in the middle of next year, in the middle of 2027, the regional councillors will be removed. We'll have a combined territories board, and they will be the ones that drive the reform process, and that will be legislated, and we'll have no control over that. Option two is that we go faster and that we set up a project to try and do some of that thinking in advance of the mandated process. And my understanding is that this is what many parts of the country are doing, is seeking to move faster and to partner with the government on arrangements that are more suitable for particular regions rather than being shoved into the generic process that is sitting in the proposal. Yeah. So I think that's my current understanding of what those two options look like. So one of the reasons why you might want to try and go faster is so you don't end up just having to, having the CTB put in place.
Moira.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand this because it feels like a really important point. Isn't the CTB also the mayors? So what's the difference between a working group of the mayors and a CTB of the mayors?
The difference is that there's no regional council representation.
Yeah. Kathleen.
No, Moira just asked my question.
Oh, okay. Jeff.
This brings back to a point that I raised earlier about that our submission should be written in such a way that it does not, hamstring us as a council in terms of whatever we agree upon at next week's meeting with regards to arrangements. I don't think there's any disagreement with regards to the principles behind wanting to, advance the work earlier. I think the issue is about when would the actual end game be, which is if it's 2028 or 2031. I would think that the easiest way to remove this is to remove the last sentence from the submission. It doesn't preclude anything else that's already been said in there, but it doesn't put us does not imperil decisions that have been made with regards to any reorganisation discussions. That might be the most elegant solution to the problem. I wonder if officers would be considering that as a solution.
You just remove the words "in place for 2028 election." That's what you mean, isn't it? That's just those 3 words. Yeah, that's no issue to me. Makes no difference. We're still working towards.
The principle is still the same.
Yeah,
and
makes
allows us as councillors to then have the opportunity to discuss that very, I think, particularly thorny issue as part of the broader reorganisation matter.
I have no problem with that. Does anyone have a problem removing those few words? Nope. Okay, anyone else? Nope. Thank you.
Just on the second part, you're going to the second part now.
We are now.
Yep, good, thanks.
So there's a paper coming to you next Thursday, which basically sets out the kind of rationale and intention of establishing a joint working group. It's very much the same kind of paper that went to Wellington City Council last week. Regional councils considering the same kind of paper the same day that you are, as are the other councils in the region. It essentially is asking you to endorse the establishment of a working group that's looking at that very first stage of the process. So the kind of mapping of current services, information gathering, gap analysis, preparing a public engagement plan, but not actually undertaking any public engagement. So giving elected members an opportunity to review that engagement plan and make sure that it's a plan you're comfortable with and you think is appropriate. And also that there would be regular reporting back from that joint working group through chief executives to mayors and elected members through that process. The Wellington Mayor is leading engagement with ministers as the chair of the Mayoral Forum. My understanding is that he met with the Prime Minister on Monday. The outcome of that's still to be reported through to CEs and mayors. And the intention is to meet other party leaders as well, just to make sure that there's cross-party understanding of Wellington's desire to put in place some bespoke approach to reorganisation or governance options. And then there's a bunch of principles in that paper speaking to how the joint working group should operate. It's a high-level endorsement and mandate that's being sought. And Wellington City Council has indicated that it is willing to take a coordination role and to contribute perhaps a significant resource into this, but there would be an expectation that each council that was participating would make a contribution to resourcing the working group. So that paper will be in your packs for your meeting next week.
Thank you. Moira.
Yeah, just signalling there are, I have a theme, you'll note. There are a couple of things I would like to see in this, and I get that it's tricky because this is a paper that Wellington's already seen, but I think it's important for us to think about. It's great that Wellington City has agreed to lead that, and of course that's sensible and obvious. But Wellington City, the residents and ratepayers of Wellington City will experience the least change through an amalgamation of any resident or ratepayer in the region. That's the experience in Auckland. The offices are likely to remain in Wellington City. They have the same access to staff and officers as they have now. So it's really the other councils that have to think hard about how some kind of amalgamated system will work best for their residents and ratepayers. And so I think the initial focus, it may be sort of buried in the wording, but I can't see anything in the initial focus that suggests that work will be done on which decisions are best made at which level. Because for us, there's a really critical question around if we have a local board or local boards, what are they going to be able to do? And it needs to be more than cutting ribbons and, holding festivals with respect to culture in the city. So that's critical to me as a focus. And then again, it's not in the principles. Effective local government representation, I read as meaning we will have more sway with ministers. And I think that's what's intended there. What I don't see is any principle around subsidiarity or decisions made at the level that they have best effect for residents and ratepayers. So I would need to see that in the principles to be happy with the paper.
Well, the paper's not out yet, so
Yeah.
yeah. Jeff.
Kia ora no. I think that reading through our paper and also Wellington City's paper from last week, I understand the point of it being a high-level language. I think that next week will be the opportunity for councillors to have that debate and, if necessary, provide additional guidance to our representative with regards to conversations with regards to the fleshing out of some of those principles. I would point out, for instance, that the point 2, effective local government representation, does leave a great deal of latitude with regards to what is effective. And I note this in the context of something I raised last year, which is that we want to avoid some of the problems that Auckland has had in development of their super city. I note in our documentation in Wellington Cities, it does say that it's going to look at data and evidence from previous reform opportunities as well, which hopefully solves that problem. But point out that in terms of the ability of residents to engage with representatives around the council table in Auckland, was it 18 representatives? They have on average represent one for every 90,000 people. An MP represents approximately one for every 60,000. Greater Wellington Regional Council is approximately one for every 40,000. We have a much smaller council, and it's far more closely connected because of this relatively lower number of councillors to people to councillors, which I think is an important point that gets lost in these conversations about the effectiveness of local government representation. I also think something else that gets lost in this conversation as well are for those groups for which geography is not the barrier. It is because of the communities of interest that we serve. Rangatahi, Māori and Pacifica that aren't, or certainly not mana that's not part of mana whenua, the matawaka near. Those with direct lived experience of accessibility challenges. We should be mindful that the principles of those are not lost in this, that the principles we use should not lose sight of those communities of interest as well in terms of that conversation. There is an opportunity here that if we want to be advance the work quicker than the central government, it also means that we have the opportunity to think outside the square with regards to the role of representation as well. Finally, I reinforce Councillor Lawler's point. One of the big critiques of Auckland with regards to the use of community boards is the relative ineffectiveness that they have because they have so little delegated responsibility. Is that something that people in Wellington will want to go down the path, knowing that Aucklanders have made it very clear that a toothless organisation for a community board does not hold any true power? Are we comfortable with that level of delegation? Do we really need community boards based on geography, perhaps community boards based on community, perhaps a voice for those who aren't directly elected but have some powers at this table, in the same way that currently mana whenua have a voice at the main table but they do not have a vote, and likewise perhaps a more proactive approach with regards to mana whenua representation at the head table is again the kind of topics that we would want to talk about as part of that point too. So I raise all of these just to point out that there is broadness in that point. It is up to us next week when we have a discussion as to whether or not we want to give additional guidance in how we have those conversations. Kia ora.
Thank you. That's you. Oh, no, sorry. No, I've got Kathleen, then you.
Just further to Councillor Hayward and Councillor Lawler's points, given the pace of what's been proposed, what safeguards will be in place to ensure that any modelling or advice is independent and is transparent and able to withstand public scrutiny? So that's one of my questions.
In the Wellington paper that went up last week, they specifically included an expectation that there would be independent peer review of various elements of the analysis that was undertaken to inform any subsequent decisions and conversations about options. So I think that idea of making sure that there's robust analysis, that there's independent oversight of findings and review can be built into the process. All of that, of course, comes with cost. The more, when you add independent peer review of things, that has a cost to it. But I think that is an inherent part of certainly some of your peer councils around the region, their expectations.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, do you have an estimate of what it would cost to establish this group, or really what we would be contributing, and if it would have a rates impact?
It will have some kind of rates impact. Possibly it is possible to do what we've done around some of the water, to borrow against a future. Not always our favourite thing to do, but we have no idea until the working group is established and actually frames the issue adequately. We won't. Just on your previous point, I would point out that the government does have the Local Government Commission. I assume, although there's quite a lot of assumptions in some of this, because the government is changing quite a lot of things, but the Local Government Commission typically has often ex-politicians from around the country, combination of people with different expertise, and proposals currently all go through that process, which does provide some independence of thought rather than just the strongest voice in a particular region. So there is some assurance processes in place currently that we are assuming will be used in any future process.
Ross. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, ladies. Do you want questions after you've gone through it, or what are you doing? Taking it as read?
We've got some slides, and happy to take questions during or at the end, doesn't matter to us.
Okay.
I think you've all met Alex Kitson, who's one of our planners in the team, and we've got the rest of the team behind us. So there two bills that have come out. We have the bills in front of us that Alex and the team have been working on, the draft submission that you've seen. There's a lot of detail that isn't in the bills that the government has proposed will come out later. So forgive us if there's some questions that we're not able to answer, but it will be because we haven't got the detail. We're working very closely with Ngāti Toa on our submission, and have had feedback from them, and we've also worked regionally. So we've had several wānanga with iwi and Greater Wellington and the other local authorities, as well as separate conversations with them. So it's very much all planning minds, kind of in a bit of a think tank to get to where we've got to. I'll hand it over to Alex.
Kia ora koutou. So we've just included this slide just to show the difference between the two bills that were introduced. As you'll see, there's no longer sustainable management as a key principle, and they've gone with a kind of general theme of other recent legislation where it's quite descriptive, quite straight to the point purpose. So when we've been drafting up the submission, we've been thinking about areas of general support, because we think it's also important to show that support across the reform packages, and then getting into the areas of concern across the reform, and then getting into more technical points specifically around the planning bill. We've left the technical points of the Natural Environment Bill to Greater Wellington, as most of those functions sit with Regional Council, but we have made comment where we see it's still highly important for Porirua communities. So we can just quickly go through some of the high-level submission points in support. So we see the general intent of the reform to make it faster, less cost, is supportive. Obviously, there's more detail that we get into that shows our concern. Across the region, there's a support for a combined plan and greater weighting for the regional spatial plans. The standardisation of plan provisions is quite supportive, so that means we have quite a standardised way of doing some planning, but we'll have the opportunity to do more bespoke planning where we need to in our land use plans. There's greater integration across legislation, particularly in the regional spatial plan. We see that as beneficial, giving the spatial plan more weight than what we currently have in the system. Greater compliance, monitoring, enforcement, as well as a digital e-plan where all of the plans will go into one form so that no matter where someone is, they can go in and find the relevant plans. And then we see the funnel system that they've created a lot clearer, and obviously a lesson learnt from the RMA. So the areas of more concern, particularly around the approach to the Treaty of Waitangi and a limited and prescribed role for mana whenua across the planning system. The scope of the effects is now quite limited, which will be quite a change in planning culture, and it will be something that we'll need to really work through. The cost of the new system is definitely front of mind, and definitely something that we've highlighted for you in the draft submission, particularly around the regulatory relief framework and implementing that and what relief might look like for residents. Impact on the natural environment, again, that's the kind of tension that we're seeing between private property rights and providing for natural environment protections. We've got additional ministerial powers, which we're seeing is considerable overreach without, and what we're recommending is some significant safeguards to ensure locally led decision making. And we'll just, anything else? And then we've just included the timeline here for you, just to kind of keep showing that we've got some tight timeframes to get to the end, and that's a point we're raising in the submission is particularly in the first suite, so that first round where we've got the regional spatial plan, and then we're quickly into the land use plans with wanting to identify that we need sufficient time to make robust planning decisions, but we also acknowledge the fact that we want to go with some pressure. So happy for any questions.
Questions. Josh.
Yeah, thank you. Some question around the part of our submission on the role and voice of mana whenua being vital for local planning. So I agree with everything in there. The observation I would make is that a lot of the arguments we appear to be making at the moment are around how we should be doing this because it is the right thing to do. We have a really good relationship. Those are all really good arguments, but they're arguments that, frankly, I don't think the government is going to find convincing. I don't think they care. I wonder if there are some other angles we can take in this argument as well. I think it's important to remember that a lot of the processes we have in place at the moment around engagement with mana whenua weren't just put into our legislation because the government was feeling kind. They were compromises. The natural long-term outcome of cutting those voices out, I think, is more challenges on things in the Waitangi Tribunal, more delays that come from other things, more protests. And I wonder if we can allude to the fact that not only is inclusion of Māori voice the right thing to do, we should leave all of that in there, actually it's the pragmatic thing to do. Long term, it's the thing that's going to make things the most efficient. We're going to save potential costs as a result of it. Those are the only sorts of arguments that I can see being persuasive with the current government. So that would just be my only observation on that. I don't have any other comments on what you've talked through so far. I think this looks really good. Thank you.
Moira.
Thank you.
Yes, I would certainly endorse Councillor Trillin's comments, and the point that mana whenua are significant players in the city in terms of land use management. So to not give them direct input is in a way just sort of time wasting, because as Josh says, it'll just go round and round in circles. So I think acknowledging their role in the city is really critical. Mine is mainly a question. I thought when we had the presentation last year, I thought one of our concerns with, and maybe it's the standardised consenting process, that was that we would end up with sort of a national set of zones in our plan, and there'd be a sort of drop down and you get to pick one, and it arguably would not meet the needs of our locality. Is that less of a concern now, or I'm just trying to work out where we've talked about that risk?
We've talked about that, and that's to do with the standardised land use planning. So yes, we are concerned about it, but we do also see that there are some efficiencies to be gained by doing it this way, and it does make it easier for developers who are working across many districts. One of the things, it's very hard to comment on it because the detail of what that will look like will come out in this national direction, which government are proposing after they have landed the bill. So if you'll see that it says the bills that they're saying will come out in June is the first point. The second one is national policy direction and national standards, and that's 9 months after royal assent. That's what is going to tell us and show us what that standardisation will look like.
Just to follow up then, so have we, I mean, I know we've talked about the process, but that lack of transparency is quite significant, not just for councils, but for residents.
Sorry, yes, definitely in the submission, I think it's important to highlight that point, isn't it? That we're going based on what we currently have, which makes it harder to formalise a more robust view of the system. So we're I think we've highlighted, and we can make that stronger too if you need, to show that the statements that we're making are based on what we have at date. Yeah.
That's answered you, Maura? Jeff.
Kia ora no. Thank you to officers for the preparation of the submission. I wanted to highlight two specific sections. Statements 40, whatever, actually they are paragraphs 40 to 45. I think, in essence, I think the language needs to be stronger in here. I have grave concerns about the ability of councils to be able to, as has been stated in here, being able to provide relief with regards to these types of issues when it comes to protecting the natural environment, and that it may lead to council providing there'd be no additional safeguards in place. Furthermore, the financial redress situation puts councils in a very a dangerous position in terms of effectively a blank cheque for developers to be for that they will that we have to give to them. So I think the language around our severe extreme concerns should be noted in here. I do, however, appreciate the language saying that where it is actually central government responsibility that they should be imparting that cost. I think that's an absolutely fine suggestion. The second part is with regards to paragraph 48. And I just wanted to highlight that I think you've really nailed the point around better language with regards to climate change in the wording in the legislation. So I think just to steal the march off my my colleague, Councillor Trillin, I think that the proposed remedy is exactly the right one. Finally, likewise, both of my points do not presume that central government will be swayed by the strength of the arguments in the submission from Porirua City Council, yet we must still make them. Kia ora.
Kathleen?
I'd just like to go back to the point around mana whenua. Hime and Uncle Taku, our tūpuna knew that wetlands were significant, they weren't swamplands. They knew that filling in the harbour was going to have significant consequences. They knew that straightening the Porirua River stream was going to wreck our harbour, and they weren't consulted. But had they been, we wouldn't necessarily be in the position we are right now. So I just want to emphasise that it is more, it's not just about, as you say, the right thing to do, but it actually is about efficiency and cost because of the pre-existing and historical knowledge that mana whenua have on this rohe, in this whenua.
Yeah, thank you.
Moira?
I'm sorry, I'm having lots of turns, but a thought has just occurred to me. I know this is in some ways, like from a politician's point of view, relatively dry. This is like technical responses to clauses in a piece of legislation. I wonder what it would be like to take the Porirua Harbour Accord as an example and then run it through these pieces of legislation. And I wonder whether it would be worth presenting that. Are we intending to submit, and whether we might submit using the Harbour Accord as an example, because it would put Porirua on the map and it would put the harbour on the map, which might be quite a strategic thing to do, particularly in all of the reforms. Just a thought. I know it's more work, but it's just a thought.
So the submission is due tomorrow at 4:30.
Yeah.
That's the first point. The second thing is that we weren't going to propose to present to Select Committee because of the amount of, we've got a small team, we've got a full workload, and we wanted to get some other work done. But so I leave that to my managers to speak to.
Not possible in that short time.
I think I take the point, and I guess I'm wondering whether we can use it for the mana whenua example around how their perspective on managing the whenua has a really important part for longevity and understanding. So I feel quite comfortable that we could use it in that space. I think to weave it in the rest of the submission would be a really big ask for us to achieve by tomorrow. But I take the point, Moira, and we can look at it for the mana whenua point. I think perhaps we can look at there.
Kylie?
Nitpicking wording in a submission that probably only one person's going to read, I don't think is all too. Isn't the way to go. I think what's important to me is that the process so far and any process going forward is fair and robust. I think that is important to me than wordings on a piece of paper. But I think it's fine the way it is. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, ladies. Welcome.
Kia ora, thank you for having me. So I'm here to discuss the submission on development levies as a reform from development contributions. So the submission is due on the 20th, so we'll be coming back on the 19th council meeting for approval. Cool. So development levies are coming in to replace the current development contribution system, which was designed in 2002 and based on quite rigid land use planning. Today, with all the changes to all the land use planning, the system no longer functions as well as it could, and so hence the reforms. The timeline on the reforms, the government are looking to have the legislation in place by Q1 2027 and implemented by July 1 2028. So we would need a development levies policy that's interlinked with our council infrastructure strategy, our land use goals and our financial strategies before that time. As you would have read in the submission, we're largely supportive of these changes. It does need to happen, but there are several warnings in there to just prompt a little bit more thought from those developing the bill as it carries on.
Any questions? Jeff?
Thank you for the preparation of the submission. I just want to get into the latter part of it with regards to the administration and talking about the proposal of a sliding scale, potentially using a sliding scale using the 4 categories. I just want to come back to the last one, which is the development agreement, first mover, bespoke assessment. If I've understood this correctly, this would mean that we would have an arrangement that wouldn't be too dissimilar from what we usually use with DCs in terms of agreements with developers and so forth. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in that context, it would mean that there would also be some deviation from full charging of what would be the normal amount due for a development of that type. So in effect, a discount on the development. Is that correct?
Where appropriate, yes.
Yes. And so this suggestion, is this part of, I couldn't get the clarity around this part, is this part of what central government has been proposing as a way forward in terms of this graduated system, or is it something we're proposing as part of the development of a new development levies policy if the law is enacted?
Thank you, Councillor. That point is purely on recovering our cost for developing a development agreement or doing a bespoke assessment for a developer or undertaking the work to create a first mover agreement with the developer. So that's purely in recovering our time as officers to do that work.
Okay. Last question. I guess one of the questions that I would have with regards to my previous, speaking on this issue in previous cycles, previous terms, is the concern I would have around any potential grandfathering in of existing arrangements from what is our current DC policy to a new development levies policy. Now, obviously, that's way down the track. This is still talking about central government legislation in that situation. But I guess I'm highlighting the potential discomfort I have around the issue of grandfathering in for new developments post with the regime. I'm not necessarily talking about existing arrangements that have already been agreed to. So I just, want to highlight my potential discomfort around that issue.
Thank you. Moira?
I have read the papers, but I have some real basic kind of bunny questions because I'm trying to get my head around what the difference between this and the existing scheme is. I get that this promotes standardisation, that makes sense, but I'm trying to understand, is the suggestion that somehow this enables more levying of subsequent development after the first development? Do I have that right?
Thank you, Councillor. You're quite right. The differences in the kind of basic mechanics of this, they don't seem that distinct from each other. Unfortunately, the draft bill has excluded how development levies are calculated. So that's a bit of an issue, but that will come with time. But the basic mechanics are the same. We will determine a cost for infrastructure relating to growth. We will then spread that over the number of new dwellings and households we believe we'll get. That will be levied against those households when they're developed as through subdivision or construction. We'll take those funds and then we'll use that to build the growth infrastructure. So the premise is the same. From development contributions to development levies, it's not a throw everything out and try again.
Will we actually be doing that, or Te Akiwai be doing the infrastructure bill side of it? Because they will want growth to pay for growth, and council's not subsidising it. So I'm not think that's correct with what you just said then.
It will be with Te Akiwai, it will be a combination. We will do ours for our infrastructure, our reserves, our roading, and Te Akiwai will be doing their own
The subdivisions and everything else.
For the waters. So
Yes.
we will both be charging levies just for different sets of
Yeah,
infrastructure.
it just doesn't make it sound like that, that's all. Ross?
Well, so it begs the question, doesn't it, through all this, will growth actually pay for growth as a result of this?
Again, with the methodology not in the bill, we'll pop that aside. This gets us a lot closer to being able to fully recover those costs. A few really small but key points that have been added in here are we're able to reassess development levies every 3 years if they're not paid. So if we have a development that takes longer than 3 years to start, we can reassess them at a new rate. We can also charge interest on unpaid development levies. And those are things that we're not able to do currently under development contributions.
But can't they pay them 3 years in advance so that they get that fee and then they're covered?
Yep, absolutely, and they'll be covered, and we will hopefully have money in the bank there that
Yep.
we can then work with as opposed to an outstanding debt of kind.
Follow up, Ross.
But we're still left, as is noted in the papers, that with the fact that nobody knows what the future is.
No.
And, we could, what I'm just worried about is we'll still be potentially caught out, as we are now. We know that. It's not going to actually fix that issue, is it?
No, we're still working on forecasts of the cost of infrastructure that's forecasted on a population. So yes, it is still crystal ball gazing over a long period of time.
Kathleen?
Just two questions. The first one is I'm just looking at the pathway ahead slide that we had at the start. Where in the time frame does the development levies kind of kick in?
So we've got Q1 it'll be passed into legislation. July 1, 2028 will be the first time we're allowed to charge development levies, and they are proposing a 3-year rollout period or phase-in period where charges are slowly ramped up, and that is something that we have disagreed with. If we know the cost of growth, we should be charging the cost of growth. So that is one of our notes in the submission.
And then just last question, with the changes with the granny flats, will they be affected?
Granny flats will, depending on how the definitions roll out with the regulator, I imagine granny flats will be covered by development levies and will still need to pay as they go. But it will depend on how the regulator defines development, growth, housing.
Wera?
Sorry, I don't understand the reference to first mover compensation. What does that mean?
Yes, so the first mover compensation is the idea of a developer providing infrastructure not only for their development but for broader growth in a timeframe that council hasn't allowed for. So if we've planned a project for 2035 and a developer needs it by 2030, they're able to push forward, put the infrastructure in the ground, and the development contributions that we would collect towards that will be passed straight on to the developer. So it's a way of incentivising and compensating a developer for doing that work.
So an example would be in the Northern Growth area, where Plymouton Farm Stage 1 has had to consider what happens throughout the rest of the development. That's the kind of example where you see it play out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to the end of our live stream. No, Moira.
The way ahead, all of that lovely jubbly stuff happening, we the comment that was made was that because there's so much happening, updates will come to council, and also something will come to council about how we prepare for the LTP and annual plan. I'm just mindful of the conversations last year about how we keep our residents up to date with all of this, because it's all, I mean, it's hard enough for us to keep our heads around it. So I'm just wondering, will we get with that a paper on what our communication and engagement plan is to try and take the city with us while all of this stuff happens?
Yes. So the overall program is meeting the need that's been requested, and it will show what consultation and engagement is happening on operational matters as well as future forward matters. And our comms team will look at the informal ways we can communicate that and the formal ways.
Our newsletter.
That's right. So we're going to try and show you that sort of overview by quarter throughout a financial year. So we'll bring that for feedback to you around whether that works and we can tweak. So the intention is to try and do that, Moira. Yep.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our live stream. Thank you.